Nearly 6 decades. Can you imagine surviving that long on death row?
I mean, wow, it's almost unfathomable.
That's the reality for Iwao Hakamada, a former boxer in Japan who's 88 years old now.
Yeah, this case is one of those that really sticks with you.
It's gotten global attention, raises so many questions about justice, about how a system could allow this to happen.
Right, like what does justice even mean when so much time has passed?
That's what we're going to deep dive into today, Hakamada's case.
It's a long and complicated one.
It starts back in 1966 with a horrifying crime.
A murder, right.
Yeah, a whole family in Japan was murdered. Hakamada's boss at this miso factory, the boss's wife, and their 2 teenage kids.
Brutal. Must have been huge pressure to find whoever did it.
Absolutely. And Hakamada, because he worked the factory, he became a suspect.
And this is where it gets tricky. He was convicted in 1968, but based largely on a confession.
Which he later said was coerced.
Exactly. That's always such a red flag in these cases.
For sure. But it wasn't just the confession. There's another piece of evidence, blood-stained clothes.
Oh, right, those clothes found in, what was it, a miso vat?
Yeah, a miso vat at the factory, a year after the murders.
See, that's what the defense argued, that they were planted.
They said the bloodstains, the color, it just didn't add up for them to have been there that long.
So right from the start, there were doubts about the evidence.
You'd think that'd be enough to raise some serious red flags, maybe trigger a more thorough investigation.
You'd hope so.
But that's not what happened. Instead of more investigation, what happened?
It's kind of hard to believe, but the case just lingered in the system for decades.
Decades. You're kidding.
Oh, seriously, years and years.
So what was going on during that time? Were there appeals? Did anybody try to get the case back in court?
Oh, yeah, there were definitely attempts. And this is where Hakamada's sister comes in, Hideko.
She must have been incredibly devoted to her brother.
Absolutely. Her dedication to this case, it's really remarkable.
To keep fighting all those years.
Decades, really. Imagine the strength that took.
It's amazing. What was her approach? How'd she keep the case alive for so long?
She was tireless, worked on raising awareness, getting people to pay attention.
And rallying for support.
Exactly. And finally, her persistence paid off in 2014.
2014. That's over 40 years after that original conviction. What was the turning point?
New DNA evidence came to light.
Oh, wow.
And it completely changed everything we thought we knew about the case.
What do you mean?
So that DNA they found on the bloodstained clothes, turns out it wasn't a match for Hakamada.
Wait, so the evidence they used to convict him might actually prove he was innocent?
That's exactly what happened. Suddenly, the prosecution's whole case, which was based on the confession and those clothes, it was on shaky ground.
That's an understatement.
Totally. This new evidence, though, it was enough to get a retrial. And incredibly, after 46 years, Hakamada was released from prison.
I can only imagine how both he and Hideko must have felt.
Oh, I'm sure it was an overwhelming mix of relief, disbelief, maybe even a little anger at all the years lost.
Definitely. But this wasn't a complete victory yet, though, right?
You're right. And this is where things get, well, let's just say the Japanese legal system can be very thorough.
Thorough, you mean?
Slow.
Yeah, I was going to say.
It can move pretty slowly. Even with this new DNA evidence, there are still delays, legal hurdles.
Wow, so even with this seemingly slam dunk evidence, his fight wasn't over.
Sadly, no. It almost felt like the system itself was resisting the idea that a mistake had been made.
Right.
But one positive thing at Hakamada's case, it wasn't just happening in a vacuum.
Good. People were paying attention.
Absolutely. This wasn't just a local story anymore. Hakamada's situation started to get international attention.
The world was watching.
They were watching and waiting to see if justice delayed would turn into justice denied.
And that brings us to today, right? With Hakamada still technically under a death sentence and this crucial court hearing on the horizon. So here we are. After all these years, all these legal battles, it comes down to this hearing on September 26th.
It's hard to even grasp, you know? A life hanging in the balance after all this time.
What's the prosecution's case at this point? How can they possibly justify upholding this death sentence after everything that's come to light?
It seems they're really sticking to their guns. They keep going back to that initial confession saying it's still valid.
But what about the coercion?
Right, and they're also clinging to the blood-stained clothes as evidence.
But the DNA doesn't match. It seems like a pretty huge detail to just ignore.
You'd think. But that's their argument, that even with the DNA discrepancies, the overall evidence points to Hakamada.
I don't know. It's hard to see it that way. What are the defense saying?
Well, they're really hitting hard on the unreliability of that confession, bringing up the allegations of coercion again.
Which makes sense. Who knows what happened during that interrogation after all these years?
Exactly. Plus, they're saying the DNA evidence alone should be more than enough to create reasonable doubt.
Right. Like, how can you argue with that? It's hard to imagine any judge just dismissing that.
And then, on top of all that, they're bringing in the fact that Hakamada's been detained for so long. They're saying it's inhumane, unjust to keep him on death row, especially at his age.
He's 88 years old.
It really makes you question the purpose of the justice system.
Exactly. Is it about blindly upholding convictions no matter what? Or is it about finding the truth, pursuing actual justice, even if it means admitting they made a mistake?
Such a crucial question. And the thing is, this whole case, it set a major precedent in Japan.
How so?
This is actually the 5th time ever that Japan has granted a retrial in a death penalty case.
Wow, only the 5th time.
And you know what? In those other 4 cases, the retrial, they led to acquittals.
Wow. So the stakes are incredibly high, not just for Hakamada, but for the entire system.
Absolutely. It's a huge moment. The outcome could change how the death penalty is viewed in Japan, could force them to really look at how they handle these cases, especially when there's a chance of a wrongful conviction.
It's a lot to process. This deep dive into Hakamada's case, it's been one of the most impactful ones we've done, that's for sure. It forces you to confront some really tough realities about confessions under duress, about the ethics of keeping someone locked up for so long.
Especially when their health is declining.
And ultimately, I think it makes us all question what justice really means.
It really does. No matter what happens with that court decision, Hakamada's story will stay with me. It's a reminder of just how high the stakes are in these cases and how fallible these systems can be.
It makes you think about how we can make sure something like this never happens again. That's something for all of us to consider as we wait for the court's decision. Will justice be served after nearly 6 decades? We'll have to see. Thanks for joining us for this incredibly heavy but important deep dive.